Well, we all know the value that technology can have on industry and commerce, but what impact will technology have on society at large and the future of work? Joining me to distill some of these themes and discussions emanating from the most recently held World Economic Forum on Africa is futurist, innovator and entrepreneur Gohar, Executive Director of Singularity University in Silicon Valley. So good to have you with us, and thank you for making time today, sir.
Great to be here with you, Kugu.
Whenever we hear about this theme regarding the fourth industrial revolution, I think we always think of something that might take place in the next 20 or even 25 years, but quite clearly we're living in it now. What are the significant impacts and some of the developments that we see regarding this trend emanating from Silicon Valley and how it impacts on the rest of society?
Well, we're seeing new technologies and innovation such as artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, virtual reality and augmented worlds changing every major industry all across the world. And it's going to change how we're actually going to be doing work in the future. And in Silicon Valley, this is leading to new ways of organizing for work. So we've become very familiar with the idea of the freelancer economy or the gig economy. This started out in Silicon Valley, but this is very much a global phenomenon now. And what's fascinating about this is that this is changing the way that companies in Silicon Valley are looking to hire new employees. They're not looking specifically for formal educational degrees, but they're also looking for specific skills. And this is changing the way how employees are self-skilling themselves. So we're looking at ways, for example, of creating micro degrees, nano-credentials, ways to show that you have a particular skill set outside of this formal educational model and how then you can build into this data economy. And what's interesting is that this model started out in Silicon Valley, but I'm pretty confident that it's going to spread worldwide in terms of how people look for work. In Africa, we're going to have several hundred million people who are going to be connected online over the next coming years, thanks to the efforts of companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Virgin, who are putting low connectivity satellites into Earth orbit to be able to connect the rest of the world. So when we think about that, we're able to now bring hundreds of millions of new people into this new data economy and then be able to empower them to succeed using these data-driven business models. Because ultimately, there's brilliant people all across the world, and how can we tap into the cognitive intelligence of Africans to solve big problems?
I'm glad that you also mentioned the connectivity between developed market economies as well as emerging and frontier economies that we have on the African continent. Because here we struggle with the concept of future-proofing our careers, future-proofing our skills, but also ensuring that the basics are taken care of as there's high levels of unemployment and a high youth population here on the African continent. Are there models and ways in which we can actually try to get it right and merge these two objectives?
So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all policy for all of Africa, because we have industrialized economies like South Africa and other agricultural economies. And I think it's basically a try-everything approach. So in Silicon Valley, the companies that are most successful are the ones that are taking the most shots on goal and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And so in Africa, I think we need to create different models of training this workforce for the 21st century. We can't solve 21st century problems with 20th century educational models. So we need to have these on-the-ground educational opportunities in terms of teaching, but then we also need to have artificial intelligence helping us to learn, and we need to then try different ways of skilling, whether it's highly skilled technical people or whether it's low-skilled people. And I think that what we're seeing is technology is moving us into a direction where higher successful skills in the future are going to translate to two broad job categories. One is that the future jobs are going to be based on creativity and not productivity. And what I mean by that is that those who are able to create and collaborate and ideate new things, they're going to be the ones who are going to succeed in this new digital economy, as opposed to those people who are just focusing on repetitive work. And the second major job trend that we're seeing is that we're seeing this blossoming of data-driven business models in Silicon Valley. So how can we tap into this data-driven economies to allow Africans to collaborate and also succeed? If the 20th century gold rush was all about gold mining, the 21st century gold rush is all going to be about data mining.
Precisely. Interesting dynamics that are unfolding at the moment, but what does this mean then for heads of companies and heads of institutions who dispel and write and put together policies in order to give us future direction as to how to prepare our institutions for this?
So from a policy perspective, I don't think any organization, either a government or an NGO or a business, can do it all alone. We have to have partnerships to allow us to get to that stage. The first thing I'd recommend is that, first of all, we have to have this connectivity across Africa in terms of being able to get people on the platforms. The second one is that we need to advocate lifelong learning. So this model of learning at the very early stages of your career or your adulthood, that was fine in the 20th century, but we need to have this lifelong learning model where you're constantly upskilling. You can't basically have this linear path where you accept to go from job to job to job up a career ladder. You now need to develop hybrid skills across multiple categories because the nature of your work is going to change over the next few years. And so I think the people who are going to succeed the most are those who are going to develop really highly socialized skills around collaboration, empathy, creativity, to be able to do things that artificial intelligence and automation isn't capable of doing right away.
I'm going to squeeze in this next 15 seconds, even though time is up, but I understand that according to McKinsey, 60% of the world's current jobs will be taken over by automation. I'm not too sure if mine is one of them, but how best do professionals then need to prepare themselves? You've mentioned upskilling and looking diversified ways, but from an educational perspective, what do we do?
I think you have to constantly learn and think about where you're going to be 5 years in the future, what kind of jobs you want to have, where the world is going, and then work yourself backwards 5 years to figure out what are the skills that I need to develop now to make sure in 5 years I'm still relevant. And I really hope that in the 21st century, Africa is able to develop this data-driven, mobile-first smartphone economy that will allow all of Africans to connect to this blossoming data models in the United States.
Data-driven. Thank you so much for your time today, Kian. Much appreciated, giving us phenomenal insight into how best to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution, which is probably unfolding as we speak. That was Kian Gohar, who's Executive Director of Singularity University in Silicon Valley. Well, that's how we wrap up our view of the show today. Everything from some company updates, the market report, and of course, some technology trends. Stay with us though. When we come back after the break, we get some insight and new developments regarding President Buhari's health, the release of some of the Chibok goals, and of course, market dynamics unfolding on the western parts of the continent. That's on Power Lunch, West Africa.